Have you seen the new FNAF trailer?
Alright, I watched Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and I can proudly confirm that critics can go eat a chonky pile of bricks because the movie was not a 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. FNAF 2 was most definitely peak. With what I'm trying to make is that the movie's terrible reception is more overkill than the amount of midterms university students get throughout the semester, because this was actually such a fun time in the theater. So I
don't know if you've taken a look at the reviews for this movie, but they are not good. As of Friday morning, 12% of the 59 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive, and that makes it one of the worst reviewed movies of the year. But having seen it for myself, I don't think it's that.
All I know is I was hearing them saying that this one was supposed to be bigger, bolder, more animatronic, scarier. They listened to the fans and they were gonna make true on those promises, and well, I seen the movie. I sat down with Mr. Fazbear and Chica, and I'll say, yeah, they actually did listen a little bit to the fans.
But yeah, look at this. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is overall terrible. I mean, it's just nonstop of like these critics saying this movie stinks. Like, it is the worst thing. Why did I waste my time? It goes on and on.
And unfortunately, I simply don't think that that's the movie that they delivered. It just kind of felt like an empty film. That there just wasn't much there at all on any level.
Five Nights at Freddy's 2 hit theaters on December 5th, and fans had been counting down for months. The first movie had packed theaters, gone viral, and turned Freddy's appearance on screen into a genuine cultural event with audiences screaming in their seats. Days after the sequel dropped, critics absolutely destroyed it.
Am I the biggest Five Nights at Freddy's fan in the world? Nope. But did I see the first film? Yes. Did I like it? No. But I could understand why others did. So I just saw the second film. Did I like it? Nope. But this time, I can't understand why others seem to like it.
Review sites filled with words like uninspired, childish, and hollow sequel within hours of embargo lifting. One outlet called it a movie made for YouTube reaction clips, not actual storytelling. Here's where things got interesting. While critics handed out terrible scores, fans were doing the exact opposite. Online communities exploded with praise. Fanny art flooded timelines, and emotional reactions spread across every platform. They didn't see the movie as a failure at all. They saw it as a love letter from Scott Cawthon himself to the people who made Five Nights at Freddy's what it is today. And then Scott spoke up. The man who created the entire franchise had stayed silent through most of the pre-release chaos, but he finally addressed the wave of criticism in a way nobody saw coming. His message was calm, direct, and savagely honest. The movie was never made for critics. It was made for the fans. That statement lit an even bigger fire online, sparking debates, memes, and massive fan support that completely flipped the narrative. This wasn't just a movie release anymore. It became a cultural moment, a clash between critics and community, between corporate expectations and creator authenticity. Why did critics hate FNAF 2 so much while fans embraced it like a long-lost friend? What exactly did Scott say that sent shockwaves through the fandom? The so-called disaster turned into one of the most talked-about movie releases of the year, and here's how it happened. December 5th was the day Five Nights at Freddy's 2 dropped worldwide. Theaters were packed, fans were buzzing, and ticket pre-sales had already broken records. Everyone expected another fun, spooky ride filled with Easter eggs and hidden lore. But by the next morning, the headlines told a completely different story. Major entertainment outlets dropped their reviews, and they weren't kind. One called it an unfocused mess that only longtime fans could pretend to enjoy. Another review went viral for saying it felt like watching a fan theory thread turned into a 2-hour movie. Rotten Tomatoes showed a critic score in the low 30s, while Metacritic wasn't much better. The whole thing felt like deja vu for a lot of people. The first FNAF movie also faced mixed reviews, but this time critics weren't just dismissive, they were savage. They accused the sequel of having too many callbacks, too much fan service, and not enough story. One reviewer even said it feels like a fan film with a Hollywood budget. Critics didn't realize that's exactly what fans wanted. Social media turned into a battlefield within hours of those reviews dropping. Fans filled the replies of every major outlet defending the movie, with one tweet saying, "You just don't get it," racking up over 100,000 likes. Others pointed out all the hidden lore references, connections only real fans could recognize. TikTok clips from the movie were being edited into emotional montages paired with nostalgic music from the original game. People were crying, laughing, and talking about how this film reminded them of their childhood, of staying up late watching Markiplier or Corix Kenshin scream at the animatronics. The divide between critics and fans couldn't have been clearer. Critics called it lazy, while fans called it authentic. Reviewers roasted its overly complicated plot, while fans praised how it tied together decades of game lore in a single story. The energy online was insane. A movie started trending within the first 12 hours, climbing to the #1 spot on X in multiple countries. Fan pages started sharing memes, roasting critic scores with captions like "they don't understand our trauma." The biggest surprise came when fans realized the low critic scores didn't affect ticket sales at all. Theaters were still packed, seats were selling out, people were going for second and third showings just to catch all the Easter eggs. And that's when things took an even bigger turn, because Scott Cawthon himself noticed what was happening and decided it was time to say something. While critics were busy arguing about cinematic structure, fans were building something entirely different, a cultural moment. Everywhere you looked online, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 was dominating conversation. TikTok was filled with glowing reactions, people crying at certain scenes, and others freaking out over lore hints hidden in the background. On Reddit, fans were piecing together connections between the movie and older game theories, debating what Scott was hinting at next. The energy was electric. One post in the r/Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit said, "This isn't just a movie, it's our childhood on screen." That comment alone got tens of thousands of upvotes. You could feel the emotion through every post, every fan edit, every live stream. Even major influencers and gaming creators who grew up playing FNAF were speaking out. Streamers who once covered the games years ago were now returning to talk about how the movie understood the fans better than any critic ever could. And it wasn't just nostalgia. Fans were genuinely proud. They saw this as a moment of validation, proof that the fandom wasn't just a niche online community anymore. It was a global force. Memes started rolling out calling critics out of touch and labeling them too old to get it. One viral video on X said critics think this is bad because they don't know what it's like to wait 10 years for answers. It perfectly captured how fans felt, that this movie was theirs. It didn't need to make sense to everyone. It just needed to feel right to them. And that's exactly what Scott Cawthon had promised years ago, that the FNAF universe would always belong to the fans first. When critics started bashing the movie, fans didn't back down. They doubled down. The audience score started to soar. On Rotten Tomatoes, while the critic rating sat below 40%, the fan rating shot up to the 90s. That contrast became a headline in itself, with critics hate it. Fans love it appearing everywhere. News outlets couldn't ignore the massive split. Behind all this chaos, one question started building momentum. Where was Scott Cawthon? He hadn't made a public statement yet, but fans were tagging him nonstop. They wanted him to know they stood behind him. And when he finally responded, it wasn't what anyone expected. Scott didn't come out swinging. He didn't insult the critics or complain online. His words were calm, almost poetic. He reminded everyone why he started all of this in the first place. For days, Scott Cawthon had stayed quiet. He watched the chaos unfold, with critics dragging the film, fans defending it with every ounce of energy they had, and social media turning into a battleground between two worlds. People were tagging him nonstop, begging for a response, but Scott didn't post anything. Not yet. On the evening of December 7th, just 2 days after the release, something appeared on Scott's official site and social platforms. A simple message. No flashy graphics, no PR polish, just a few paragraphs from the man himself. He began by thanking everyone who went to see the movie. He talked about how surreal it felt to see his little indie horror game, something he built alone in his bedroom years ago, now playing in theaters around the world. You could feel the sincerity in every word. But then his tone shifted. He addressed the critics directly. Without naming names, Scott wrote something that hit the internet like a lightning strike. "I understand that not everyone will get what I'm trying to do. That's okay. Five Nights at Freddy's has always been for the fans, the kids who stayed up late theorizing, the artists, the streamers, the people who made this world come alive. This movie wasn't made to impress critics. It was made to thank the people who never stopped believing." That one paragraph was all it took. Within minutes, screenshots of his statement started flooding every social platform. Fans were calling it the perfect response. Others were saying Scott had just dropped the most respectful mic drop in history, and it didn't stop there. The message was being quoted by major entertainment accounts, game news outlets, and even a few celebrities who had grown up playing FNAF. Everyone was talking about how Scott didn't fight fire with fire. He simply reminded everyone why the franchise mattered. It was authentic, real, human. In a world full of polished PR apologies, memoirs, and generic statements, Scott's words felt personal, like something written straight from the heart. He ended the message with a final line that would go viral overnight. Critics will always have their opinions, but at the end of the day, it's the fans who keep Freddy alive. That single sentence summed up everything. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration, a reminder that the Five Nights at Freddy's universe had never needed the approval of Hollywood gatekeepers to succeed. Fans flooded the replies with support. #ThankYou. Scott started trending globally, filled with fan art, messages, and old clips from the first game. Some people were even posting photos of themselves at the theater, holding tickets and tagging him with captions like "for the fans, not the critics." And that phrase, "for the fans," became the unofficial slogan of the movie's success. Not everyone took Scott's calm response so kindly. A few critics began doubling down, accusing him of ignoring criticism and hiding behind fandom. One even wrote an an op-ed claiming Scott was weaponizing his fans against reviewers. The backlash didn't stick. By that point, it was too late. The narrative had already shifted. Scott's fans weren't attacking anyone. They were celebrating the creator who had stayed loyal, who hadn't sold out his vision for Hollywood points. And as this debate grew louder, something even more shocking was happening behind the scenes. The box office numbers were rolling in. By the morning of December 8th, just 3 days after release, the early box office reports hit, and no one could believe what they were seeing. Despite the negative critic reviews, despite the headlines calling it a disaster, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 had completely dominated theaters. The movie pulled in over $100 million globally in its first weekend. Every major analyst who had predicted a steep drop after bad reviews was proven wrong in record time. And suddenly, the critics who had dismissed the film as forgettable were being asked a very uncomfortable question. If the movie is so bad, why is everyone still watching it? Articles started popping up across entertainment media trying to explain what was happening. Some called it the power of fandom. Others labeled it the Marvel effect, where loyal fans show up no matter what. But that wasn't the real story. The truth was simpler and deeper. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 wasn't selling tickets out of blind loyalty. It was connecting emotionally. Fans weren't just buying seats. They were buying into a feeling, nostalgia, community, and the comfort of seeing something that felt made for them. Still, many critics didn't understand it. They doubled down on their takes, publishing think pieces with headlines like how fan culture is ruining cinema and the destruction of objective storytelling. Some even accused Scott of pandering to his audience, which only made the fans love him more. For once, a creator wasn't pandering to critics. He was speaking directly to the people who had been there since day one. And while critics continued their debate, fans were out in theaters, making TikToks of themselves cheering during certain scenes. Videos of crowds clapping at the end of the movie started going viral. Captioned, "The critics don't get it, but we do." By now, the movie's reputation had completely flipped. What started as a critical failure had become a fan-driven triumph, one so big that even entertainment networks were forced to acknowledge it. News anchors called it a perfect storm of passion over perception. Industry insiders admitted that the backlash from critics might have actually helped the movie, fueling curiosity and driving even more people to see it. And through it all, Scott stayed silent. After his one heartfelt message, he didn't post again. He didn't argue, he didn't clap back. He simply let the results speak for themselves. Box office trackers were showing that FNAF 2 was holding strong, barely dropping in attendance even as new movies entered theaters. That's unheard of in today's industry. Critics had underestimated the one thing they couldn't control: community loyalty. When fans feel seen, when they feel respected, no amount of bad reviews can break that connection. And that's exactly what Scott Cawthon had tapped into. He's terrified by pixelated animatronics, but somehow feeling safe in the story's chaos. As the numbers climbed higher and the critics' words faded into background noise, one thing became crystal clear. Scott didn't need validation from film reviewers. He already had something far more powerful. He had the fans. The numbers came in like a bombshell at over $102 million worldwide, with some regions completely sold out for days. Theaters reported fans showing up in costume, whole friend groups dressed as Freddy, Chica, and Bonnie, turning late-night showings into what felt more like fan conventions than movie screenings. And here's the part that made Hollywood insiders stop and stare. The critic scores didn't move an inch. Even as audiences poured in by the millions, critics refused to budge from their harsh takes. But that's what made it even more fascinating. For the first time in years, the movie industry was seeing a film grow stronger after negative reviews, not weaker. Entertainment analysts were baffled. Trade outlets began running pieces with headlines like "FNAF 2 defies critics with monster opening," and fans turn their backs on review sites. One report mentioned that theaters were adding extra show times due to demand, something that rarely happens outside of Marvel or Star Wars level releases. How did a movie that critics claimed would flop end up becoming one of December's biggest hits? It all came down to one thing: connection. Fans didn't care about cinematic standards. They cared about feeling something. It brought back that mix of fear and wonder they'd felt as kids, discovering the lore, watching theories at 3 a.m., and sharing their obsession online. The sequel captured that nostalgia perfectly, and it did it unapologetically. And that word, unapologetic, became the theme of the entire release. While critics saw fan service, fans saw gratitude. They noticed every Easter egg, every sound cue, every subtle nod that only someone who had played the games would recognize. That's what Scott meant when he said this movie was for the fans. It spoke directly to the people who built the franchise from the ground up. Social media lit up with clips of packed theaters cheering when favorite characters appeared. Some fans even uploaded videos of audience reactions, gasps, screams, and applause, proving that the movie might not have been perfect cinema, but it was perfect for them. The critics' disconnect became part of the joke. Fans started turning bad reviews into memes. One viral post featured a screenshot of a one-star review that read "too confusing for casual viewers," with a fan replying, "Good, it wasn't for you." Another meme showed Freddy holding a film critic's scorecard with the caption, "You can't rate what you don't understand." It was clear the fans had claimed ownership of the narrative. They weren't embarrassed by loving a movie critics roasted. They were proud of it. Even box office analysts admitted that FNAF 2 had sparked something bigger, a reminder that the power dynamic between creators, critics, and fans was shifting. lifting. And as the numbers climbed higher, one thing became undeniable. Scott Cawthon's decision to make this film his way had paid off. He didn't chase approval. He didn't bend to criticism. He made something that meant something, and the fans rewarded him for it. The story doesn't end there. While the numbers were impressive, what came next was even more powerful. Something no critic could measure with a score. It was loyalty, unwavering loyalty. The Five Nights at Freddy's community has always been something different. It's not just a fandom. It's a culture, a mix of gamers, artists, theorists, musicians, and storytellers who've all built something bigger than the games themselves. And in the days after FNAF 2 released, that culture came alive like never before. You could feel it everywhere online. TikTok edits flooded the For You page, set to eerie remixes of the game's old soundtrack. YouTube channels were uploading analysis videos within hours of seeing the movie, breaking down clues, hidden cameos, and the new timeline implications. Reddit threads stretched hundreds of comments long, with people debating theories late into the night. It was chaos, but the kind of chaos that builds connection. Every frame of the movie became a piece of a puzzle. Every quote a potential hint from Scott. And as fans bonded over what they loved, they also bonded over what they didn't. The critics. The shared frustration of seeing their favorite story dismissed only made them tighter. They began to see themselves as the defenders of FNAF, the ones keeping the franchise safe from outsiders who didn't understand it. That unity turned into movement. Hashtags like #ForTheFans and #ThankYou. Scott flooded social feeds. Artists were uploading digital paintings of Scott as a puppet master holding Freddy strings, symbolizing him as the creator who stayed true to his vision. Cosplayers were posting thank you videos, some even showing the old games that got them into horror in the first place. It became emotional, and that's the secret power of this fan base. They don't just consume FNAF, they live it. They talk about it, create around it, and share it with people who might not even play the games. When critics attack something like that, it doesn't break the bond, it strengthens it. Even YouTube commentary channels picked up on the trend, calling this one of the most unified fan responses in recent memory. One creator summed it up perfectly. You can't kill what was built on passion. You can't criticize a memory. That line stuck. Fans started quoting it everywhere. It represented exactly how they felt, that FNAF was more than entertainment. It was a shared experience that critics could never rate. Scott's silence after his statement only amplified this feeling. He didn't need to keep defending the movie. His fans were doing it for him, and they were doing it with love, not hate. By the end of the week, the internet wasn't talking about critic scores anymore. They were talking about how a creator and his fans had outlasted an entire industry's expectations. When passion meets loyalty, when art connects with heart, no critic's rating can stand in the way of that. And that's exactly what Scott Cawthon understood better than anyone else. Fans had turned the controversy into a movement, and the movie was holding strong in theaters. But just when things seemed to be settling, Scott Cawthon made one more quiet appearance online. No press tour, no interviews, no dramatic announcement, just a simple post, again on his own website. It began with gratitude. He thanked the fans for their support, for showing up even when the world told them not to. He said watching the community rally together was the most humbling experience of his career. But then halfway through, he added something unexpected, something that felt like it came straight from his heart. I've seen a lot of arguments over this movie. I don't want it to divide anyone. The truth is, I'm thankful for every opinion, even the harsh ones, but I'll always keep making things for the people who care about these stories, because they're the reason I started doing this in the first place. It was such a Scott thing to say, calm, reflective, grounded. He didn't fan the flames, he didn't brag about box office numbers, call out critics by name. He just reminded everyone of the bigger picture, that creativity isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about making something honest. And that line, I'll always keep making things for the people who care, hit the fandom like a heartbeat. That's what they'd been doing too for years. The community had built entire worlds out of his work. Games, fan stories, animations, music videos. After that post, something amazing happened. Even a few critics started to come around. Some began updating their reviews, saying they respected the creator's honesty, or that they'd missed the emotional context. Others admitted the movie might have been made for a specific audience, and that by their own admission, they weren't that audience. It was subtle, but it mattered. It proved that sometimes authenticity can change the conversation. The fan base was turning Scott's words into a symbol of pride. People were printing them on t-shirts, editing them into tribute videos, even graffiti tagging for the fans in stylized Freddy fonts online. It became a rally cry, a statement that meant more than just liking a movie. It meant believing in something that the mainstream didn't understand, but you did. And through it all, Scott remained exactly as he'd always been, humble, quiet, and focused on the work. He didn't let the noise change him. And that might be the biggest lesson in this whole story, that staying true to your vision can be louder than any argument online. While everyone else was talking, Scott Cawthon was creating. Critics rated it low, fans rated it high. The truth lived somewhere in the middle, in the shared emotion that filled those theaters, in the joy of people seeing a piece of their childhood come to life again, and in the calm confidence of a creator who knew exactly what he was making and who he was making it for. Scott Cawthon's quiet confrontation wasn't a war against critics, it was him saying you don't have to understand it, you just have to let it exist. And that mindset, that pure creative honesty, is something the entertainment world rarely sees anymore. Today, everything is built for trends. Everything is tested, polished, reworked, worked until it's safe. FNAF 2 wasn't safe, and that's exactly why it worked. Fans could feel the passion behind it. They could sense the personal touch, the care in every detail, the love for the lore, the familiar feeling of something that was always theirs. And that's something no critic's score can replicate. By the end of the week, the conversation had completely shifted. Nobody was talking about bad reviews anymore. They were talking about how a small indie creator, someone who started with a one-man horror game, had managed to outshine multi-million-dollar studio projects. It was poetic. A franchise born from the internet had conquered Hollywood on its own terms. And that's the takeaway that lingers. You don't need validation from the elite to make an impact. You just need authenticity and people who believe in it. And looking at the packed theaters, the trending hashtags, and the millions of voices shouting in unison online, one thing is undeniable. He kept that promise.